Okay, the claim that I will be refuting is Carissa's and that premarriage counseling strengthens the marriage. Her two main points are that premarital counseling and education lowers your rate of divorce and that it reduces interpersonal problems. I'll begin with the point on the first claim that premarital counseling lowers divorce rate. My opponent used a study quoted by Dr. Sandra Sarin, a psychotherapist, where she researched 56 couples that participated in premarital counseling and claimed that it had a success rate of 82.5% of maintaining healthy marriage without divorce. However, how she got to that conclusion she failed to mention. Of the 56 couples, only 40 responded, and of those 40, 33 remained in a happy marriage, while the remaining 7, 2 of them divorced and 5 are in unsatisfactory marriages. She got the 82.5% from the 40 that responded, but failed to include the others. This is voluntary response bias, and they can't lead to the 82.5% conclusion because you don't know if it's actually accurate. Of the people that responded, yes, it is accurate, 82.5%, because 33 out of the 40. But as a general statement, you can't say it's accurate in preventing divorce. However, based on her 82.5% success rate, that means there's a 17.5% failure rate, resulting in divorce or unstable marriages, which is actually pretty high and could contradict her evidence. It's also outdated, and in the study it was quoted, it was done several years ago, but when further looked at, it was actually done 10 years ago in 2002, making it outdated evidence. In the U.S. Census in 2000, the divorce rate was 6.2% in the United States. In 2008, it was 5.2%. Why the rate changed, they don't really know. There's too many factors, so you can't conclude that it's due to premarital counseling. But the simple fact is that the divorce rate has changed over time, and we can't rely on evidence from 10 years ago. The second point I'd like to refute is that counseling reduces interpersonal problems and increases communication. Previous evidence used by my opponent contradicts her statement. As quoted from Psych Today about premarital counseling and whether it actually helps, they said, "It is difficult to measure because there are so many other factors that help couples stay together." This contradicts the evidence because they're right. There's a lot of factors that affect relationships, and it can be taken into account because all couples are different. Which brings me to my next argument, that too many couples depend on premarital counseling to solve their problems. Although it can increase the communication in a counseling room, it reduces it in everyday life. According to USA Today, some couples feel more comfortable in a counseling room with a counselor alone because the counselor is able to bring up topics that the couples wouldn't necessarily talk about. This causes them to internalize their feelings until their next session and decreases communication between couples. They can't rely on a counselor forever. My last argument is a personal experience. My parents married at the age of 26 and divorced 10 years later. They participated in premarital counseling, and I asked them, if premarital counseling is supposed to decrease the divorce rate, why didn't it work for you? And they said, at the time, premarital counseling seemed like a good idea, but looking back, I don't really think it did much. People don't get divorced because they don't participate in premarital counseling. People get divorced because they aren't right for each other. The time before you get married is when you are the most starstruck in love, and you tend to look past all your partner's faults. As time goes on, you see that you are just going to have to live with it, or their faults, and sometimes after a while you realize you just can't. After successfully refuting my opponent's two main points, that premarital counseling lowers divorce rate and reduces interpersonal problems, I conclude that counseling does not necessarily strengthen a marriage.
All right, the argument was easy to follow structurally. I thought that you had good presses on all of the points, and some of those presses are also elaborated on very effectively. For instance, your challenge about the response bias I thought was adequately explained, and then the explanation about how the information might be outdated. Look, there's a fluctuation in divorce rates, and nobody can explain why that's occurring, and that's occurred between the time that this study was done and presently. I think think that's an interesting explanation for why we need more contemporary data to make that inference from. So you did a good job developing an argument there. On the second point, you do have the quote that says it's difficult to quantify or explain why it is that some people get together and why they break up. I think that you're right. That is a nice generic piece of information that responds to both the point above and everything that comes afterwards, and it is contradicting some of the advocates' points. The explanation about all of the particular reasons why people divorce, I think, could be elaborated on a little bit, and then a demonstration that counseling would probably not have addressed some of those issues. For instance, financing, infidelity, pressures from economic issues. There are lots of reasons, and I think that that would have been something that could have filled in and made that argument a little bit stronger. I think the USA Today information that suggests that people might become dependent on counseling as a way to deal with their problems, and that could create worse problems for them, is an interesting idea, and it's a good counterclaim on that point. I'm not sure that it's developed enough to be convincing, but it does raise some doubt, and if the advocate's point wasn't developed enough to be convincing, then that's all you need to do. On the last point, the personal example, I think, is a nice one in giving you some credibility, and it also points out that there are a variety of reasons that are not always reducible to something that can be addressed by counseling. All right, thank you.